Senator Sam Mezec, or Minister, firstly, congratulations on your appointment as Children's Minister. How are you settling into the role?
It's very interesting. It's a big role, and I'm not just Minister for Children, but also Minister for Housing, and that's obviously a really important portfolio as well. The media, mainstream media at least, has been reporting quite a lot in recent weeks, saying the government's not doing anything, and has been quite critical, and that doesn't reflect certainly how I feel. I think that actually quite a lot has been going on, but it's not really stuff that makes the headlines. A lot of it's behind the scenes and getting the sort of early work done, ready for projects that will be pursued over the coming months. But the one thing I will say is that this new government feels a lot more cohesive and a lot more at ease with itself than I think previous governments have felt. There's been a lot of toxicity, I think, in politics over recent years. We've known about internal rows in the Council of Ministers, and I don't think that's happening this time round, and I think that's really good, especially considering what a diverse Council of Ministers this is and how it does have states members from different political wings taking part. And
you're all on the same page, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, we're not necessarily coming from the same perspective on everything, but I think there's a lot of respect for each other's point of view, and we're not saying, oh well, you would say that, wouldn't you? You're the token left winger or whatever. Nobody's saying that to me, and I'm understanding where people are coming from if it's not the same place as me. And I feel like we're in the early stages of a government that's going to feel very different to the previous ones, and hopefully people will prefer this type of government than what we've had previously, less divisive, more inclusive, and working for the people of Jersey without the egos.
Well, let's see what happens. I suppose, what makes you the best person for the job as Children's Minister? I mean, to be fair, with the greatest respect, it wasn't that long ago that you were a child.
Well, yeah, and that's obviously something that gets put to me. This subject to do with Jersey's children's services is one that I have lived and breathed for the past year since the Care Inquiry report came out. It mattered a lot to me before the Care Inquiry report came out, but this, I think, was a watershed moment for the island, and as I think set the wheels in motion for turning away from the awful things that happened in Jersey previously. So it's a subject I care a lot about and have been involved in. I said during my election for Minister that some people considered it a bad thing that I'm the youngest member of the Assembly and it's responsibility put on me. But I said that I promise it's a defect I'm working on every single day. But also it wasn't that long ago that I was a child. Okay, fair enough. But growing up today is a totally different experience to what it was years and years ago. So I think actually having somebody younger in that role is a good thing, because it means you're more able to relate to a lot of the struggles that young people are going through today. It's a silly example is smartphones. Growing up with a mobile phone nowadays means childhood is actually very different from what it was in years gone by, and it presents all sorts of challenges and issues, and we have to understand young people and listen to young people if we're to find policy directions that are actually going to meet their needs, rather than older people who don't understand children imposing solutions upon them that don't actually reflect what they need.
Fair comment. You've got Mark Rogers, who's the Director General for Children, Young People, Education and Skills, Deborah McMillan, Children's Commissioner, yourself, Children's Minister, Charlie Parker, Chief Executive Officer, all responsible for children. I mean, it just sounds very top-heavy to me, to be honest. So where does the buck stop? I'll tell you why I ask, is because they used to have the corporate parent, which was Health and Social Services, Education and Home Affairs. Now what was happening was people would say, Home Affairs will say, well, it's not my department, it's Health and Social Services. Health and Social Services would say, oh no, it's passing the buck. Yeah. So where does the buck stop here? Is it with you, Charlie Parker, Deborah McMillan, Mark Rogers?
I think that's a good question, and there's sort of two answers to that. The first is that from a political perspective, the buck stops with me. I've been appointed Children's Minister, the first Children's Minister the island has had, and that was the new Chief Minister, John Lafondre, recognising that this is a political priority, and he wanted somebody for whom it was their day-to-day business to be driving some of these political things, not just publicly but behind the scenes as well. The Chief Minister can only do so much because he's got to have his eye on every subject, but the new Chief Minister is keeping an eye on this, but he wanted somebody extra politically. So the buck stops with me. There's still some work that's got to be done in finalising the role of the Children's Minister. There are still some bits and pieces that need to fall into place in terms of legal responsibilities or whatever, but that is going to happen. So politically, the buck stops with me, and I'm the one who needs to be asking the toughest questions of the civil service leadership for these services, and I'm the one who will be that seat round the Council of Ministers table, keeping other ministers informed, and I don't necessarily like the phrase, but being ready to kick off if somebody does need to kick off. But there's another answer to that question as well, which is that ultimately we are all responsible for Jersey's children and young people, but we all have a different role to play in that. And this is something that the Independent Jersey Care Inquiry criticised, and it's something that the Jersey Care Commission report from Ofsted criticised, the report that came out yesterday, that said there has been this culture of passing the buck. There has been this culture where people have not seen it as their responsibility to have a part in this. And that is something that we desperately need to change. So the Care Commission has spoken about a corporate parenting statutory framework. So we need to move away from this situation where the Health and Social Services Minister is considered the corporate parent. The Health and Social Services Minister is one corporate parent. There are lots of others as well who have a role. Children and young people will interact with all sorts of public services, not just social services or not just the health department, and the people in those departments need to realise that they have a responsibility for children, and they need to be looking out and speaking out if necessary, if they think something is wrong or a child is at risk. So that's got to change. But on top of that, the culture's got to change as well, and we have to have this wide recognition that it is all of our business to look after the most vulnerable people in our society. Even if you don't think it's your job, it is your job. Not just the government, but businesses and the media as well. And that's a piece of work that's going to take some time to ingrain in our culture, but given what's happened over previous years in Jersey, it's something we really, really need to change.
Okay, so how are you or your team going to attract capable social workers to the island? There's as we discussed yesterday at the Ofsted report, or Jersey Care Commission report, is it was identified in the Care Inquiry's report that people were too scared to speak out because they didn't have residential qualifications to live.
Yeah.
If they stuck their head above the parapet, they could, their whole livelihood, everything could go belly up. So what are you tangibly going to be doing to attract decent social workers? I'm not saying there are some decent social workers, but what are you going to do to attract people from the outside?
Yeah, and this is an issue that was raised both by the Independent Care Inquiry and the Care Commission report as well, about a sustainable workforce and making sure that we do attract the best people to come and work in Jersey, and that we train people in the island as well who are already rooted in the community, and so that they have that support network around them that they can rely on, and will hopefully be less worried about speaking out or rocking the boat or whatever. So there's a few things that have already happened. The first is that we have introduced a new on-island social work degree, so we can grow our own people who want to work.
That's okay in the long term.
That's right. That's going to be a few years before we feel the benefits from that. So there's stuff we need to do more short term than that. So the Care Commission report praised what the previous government did, and in 2017 they put extra investment into children's services so that we could have more social workers, so that they're not taking on too many cases. So if you're having to take on too many cases and look after too many families and children, you're not going to be able to develop the attachment that you need or the familiarity, and you'll be sort of overworked in that sense, and that's not good for the children to have social workers who are overworked and
not good for the social worker.
Well, yeah, indeed, not good for the social worker either. So they praised that, said that was a good thing, but there is still a lot more we've got to do. We rely too much on agency staff, and that's not good, because even though some of those agency staff are brilliant and do a really good job, because they know they're not permanent, they can often disappear for whatever reason, often perfectly innocent reasons, when something bad is about to hit, and not be there to answer for it, or not be there to provide the witness statement or whatever to help improve things. So we've got to move away from that. One thing that's already happened is we've relaxed the rules regarding key workers, spouses and children being able to work in Jersey. So if you were a social worker who wanted to come and work in Jersey, but then you found out we've got these weird immigration rules that mean your husband or wife won't be able to work for 5 years when they move here, well, you're not going to come here, are you? Because your family will be important to you. So we've relaxed those rules, so that's one less hurdle they have to worry about when coming to Jersey. And we're also about to start looking at accommodation rules as well, so that key workers, when coming to the island, know that they'll have stable and decent accommodation that they can rely on.
Well, I mean, Charlie Parker was given his qualities, wasn't he? So what makes him more important than a social worker? Somebody, if they're putting children first, what makes Charlie Parker more important than a social worker? Somebody who's got children's well-being at the front.
And that is absolutely the question we ought to be asking. You know, people have a social contribution at all levels, whether that's working in our hospital, whether that's working in our public services, teaching, or what have you. I think it's actually a deeply uncomfortable position we're in Jersey, where we have these discriminatory housing rules, and let's call it for what it is. It is discrimination. It's something I'm deeply uncomfortable with, and I said that throughout the election, and we're going to have to look at it to find a fairer solution. It's difficult because we are a small island and there is only so much population growth we can cope with. There is difficulty for a lot of people finding a home to buy or even rent at an affordable cost. So there are difficulties here, but I think when looking at what is now our top political priority, which is improving our children's services, we will have to make allowances in that to make sure we can deliver on this, because ultimately we will pay the price in the future for not getting this right. If there are too many children who go through bad experiences in their childhood, that's something that's really difficult to overcome and help them have happy and fulfilling lives later on. So, you know, it's an investment, frankly, looking at this and putting that money and support for our social workers so that they can do what they need to protect the well-being of our children here.
Okay, so we mentioned the Ofsted and Jersey Care Commission report that I filmed yesterday. So with the Ofsted report, how many users, you know, children, young adults, did the Ofsted people speak to whilst compiling their report? Did they speak to users of the service, youngsters?
I'm sure they did. I couldn't tell you what the number was. I'd have to ask them to find out. But they were here for several weeks. This was partly while the election was going on, so I think the political interaction was a little bit strange. I think I met them literally like the day before they left or whatever. But they seemed, when I spoke to them, to be pretty clued up and had spoken to people at all levels throughout this. Yeah.